Welcome to week 10, chapter 13. This week we're going to take a look at monopolistic competition and oligopoly in our text. I'm going to focus on looking at the monopolistically competitive firm and the model that accompanies that market structure. I feel that material is most important to review because it's very challenging and it definitely will be on the final exam. So let's take a look at a couple of concepts here. When we characterize a market, we need to look at the assumptions that underlie that market structure. So in a monopolistically competitive market, we find that we have firms being able to enter and exit the industry with relative ease, but not completely free entry as we had in perfect competition. We also find that they produce differentiated products. So instead of each producing the exact same product or having a hold on the market by being the only one who produces a unique product, they might produce relatively similar products, but they are differentiated. We'll see that there are many firms in the industry and they compete with advertising and marketing, and that's how they differentiate their product. So monopolistic competition on the spectrum of firm market structures would be somewhere in between perfect competition, which would be a homogeneous product that's produced by many firms. They have little to no pricing power and they are a price taker. And on the far other end of the spectrum, we have monopolies that produce a unique product in which they dominate the entire market and they are price makers. So monopolistically competitive firms fall somewhere in between. One feature of a monopolistically competitive firm is that they face a downward sloping demand curve. So unlike the firm in perfect competition, whose demand is perfectly elastic and horizontal, the monopolistically competitive firm faces a downward sloping demand curve. They'll maximize profit in the same way as all other market structures. So let's walk through that process. How do they maximize profit, and at what quantity does the firm choose to produce? This is sort of our first important question that we would ask ourselves. They will maximize profit at the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and at that quantity, any firm will produce where it receives the greatest profit. So whether the firm was perfectly competitive, a monopoly dominating the entire industry, or monopolistically competitive, we will produce where marginal revenues equal marginal cost. This is because where marginal revenues equal marginal cost is where the difference between total revenues and total cost is maximized and therefore yields the highest profit. But why will the monopolistically competitive firm not earn an economic profit in the long run? So likewise, we'll choose to produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and we will price the product at that quantity along the demand curve. So because the demand curve is the corresponding quantity demanded and price that corresponds to that quantity demanded, we are going to also price, just as we did like the monopolist or the perfectly competitive firm, at the price that corresponds to the quantity demanded along the demand curve. And we find that the monopolistically competitive firm does not earn an economic profit in the long run. One reason is because competition will shift the demand curve down and to the left. As firms enter the industry to seek to earn economic profits that are currently being earned by the monopolistically competitive firm, this will cause the demand curve to shift down and to the left. So recollect our supply and demand shifters. Demand will shift when there are fewer customers. When there are fewer customers, it will shift to the left. Likewise, if there are more people demanding a product, demand shifts to the right. So that's the first reason why we will see that the firm in a monopolistically competitive firm does not earn an economic profit in the long run. It is because its demand curve will shift down and to the left due to competition, which results because firms are able to enter and exit this industry, and when they see profit, they will enter the industry, causing our demand curve to shift down and to the left. The next thing we want to take a look at to understand how the monopolistically competitive firm operates in the long run is that at the same time, the individual monopolistically competitive firm wishes to gain market share. And in order to gain market share, they will market and advertise their product, sometimes excessively. This excessive marketing and advertising imposes additional costs on the firm, costs that the firm in perfect competition and in monopoly do not end up paying. Those additional costs raise their total costs. When their total costs are raised, their average total costs also increase. Recollect that total costs divided by the quantity we produce is average total costs. So when you take a look at the monopolistically competitive firm market structures graph, you see I've given the example of an Italian restaurant. So there are many Italian restaurants, even in Arcata and Eureka and McKinleyville and our greater Humboldt County area. So these firms all compete with one another to earn market share. They have a differentiated product, but at the end of the day, they're all selling Italian meals and ambiance and general good food, right? So what we see happen is initially some Italian restaurant might be able to earn an economic profit in the short run. Now, where will this particular firm be choosing to produce? They will produce where their marginal revenues equal marginal costs, because at that quantity, they will maximize their profits. So marginal revenues equal marginal cost based on the intersection of those two curves, so this being our marginal cost curve. Move it a little bit closer in. Oh, it's disappearing. So our marginal cost curve is this U-shaped curve, right? We initially have decreasing marginal costs and then increasing marginal costs because this is a short run model. And our marginal revenue curve lies below our demand curve. Therefore, at Q1 units of production, based on the intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenues, we will be producing Q1 units. Now, is there any relevance of this yellow line here? I put this here to show you that this is not how we denote the price that the monopolistically competitive Italian restaurant would charge. It is not the price that the monopolistically competitive restaurant would charge because it is not the price that intersects with the demand curve at this quantity demanded of Q1. Instead, we will see that the firm will price along its demand curve at the price that corresponds with the quantity demanded of Q1, which is where we're maximizing profit. So therefore, the price that this monopolistically competitive Italian restaurant would charge would be P1. So add a quantity of Q1, say this is meals per week sold, along the demand curve at that quantity, the price that corresponds is P1. We're figuring out how to maximize our profit where our marginal revenues equal marginal cost, and at that quantity is where we maximize our profit. We'll then price the product based on the price that corresponds to that quantity demanded of Q1 along the demand curve for the firm. So D being the demand curve for the firm. So something to notice about this demand curve and marginal revenue curve versus the monopolist's demand and marginal revenue curve. In monopolistically competitive model, we'll often see that the demand and marginal revenue are much flatter than for the monopolist. This flatness represents the elasticity of demand for the monopolistically competitive firm being much higher than the elasticity of demand for the monopolists. Recollect that elasticity of demand is the change in quantity demanded given a change in price. So if the price of a good that was sold by a monopolistically competitive firm was to increase, say for example, this Italian restaurant decides to increase the average price of the meals that they sell by 50%, you might just say, hey, well, I'm going to go to another Italian restaurant and eat their meals, which have not gone up by 50% since the last time I went there. But the monopolist, on the other hand, and that represents an elastic situation. So we know that elastic curves are flatter and inelastic curves are much steeper. If there was only one Italian restaurant within 1,000 miles of where you live, they might have effectively a monopoly on Italian restaurant style meals. So if the monopolist was to increase prices, say 50%, quantity demanded wouldn't fall that much because they are the monopolist and there are relatively few to no substitutes for their product. But in a monopolistically competitive market, we are going to assume there are substitutes for the product and that this individual restaurant is producing, because even though their product is differentiated, it is not unique. So right now you can tell that the firm, based on the demand, marginal revenue, average total cost, and marginal cost curves, is actually earning positive economic profit. They're earning positive economic profit because at this quantity demanded of Q1, they are pricing substantially above average total costs at that quantity. So where price is greater than average total cost, we have profit. And therefore we can see that this rectangle here, P minus ATC times Q1, this entire rectangle would represent the amount of profit that this firm is earning. Now, we talked about why the firm will not earn an economic profit in the long run, and let's see how this ends up working. So let's assume that this positive economic profit exists, and that you see it, and that I see it, and that everybody sees it. And they see that these Italian restaurants, and this one in particular, are making a great deal of profit. What we'll do is we will enter the industry. When you and I, and maybe someone else, enters the industry and increases the amount of Italian restaurants in the town, pro rata, there will be fewer people eating at this particular Italian restaurant. And the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve corresponding to that demand will shift downwards. Demand shifts downward, reflecting the fact that the looking at it as a demand shifter. So we remember when there are fewer individuals demanding a good or service, that this actually causes demand to shift down and to the left. The other thing that's going to happen, and we will see this in the long run, is that with a lot of advertising, the firm will actually end up spending so much on advertising and marketing that it causes its average total cost to rise to meet its demand curve. So we will be now producing fewer meals because we're one of now many Italian restaurants in the town. So the quantity demanded for our meals will change because our marginal revenue curve shifted, because our demand curve shifted, and we'll produce where marginal revenue intersects marginal cost at this new Q2, which was less than the quantity we were originally producing. And we will price our meals at the corresponding price that matches the quantity demanded along the demand curve. So let's take a look at what price that is. So here we will price along our demand curve. And that price we notice is actually lower than our original P1. So we're now going to have to price our meals at a lower price also. Because of the increase in advertising costs and marketing costs, we have that increase in our total cost, which increases our average total cost. And here, our average total cost have risen to basically be tangent with the demand curve, therefore eliminating any economic profit. So here, our average total cost is basically equal to price. And our average total cost being equal to price means that we no longer will be receiving any economic profit as a firm. So in the long run, the monopolistically competitive firm will produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and at that quantity demanded, charge a price that corresponds to the current demand curve. Because this demand curve is shifted in, and because our average total costs have shifted up at every unit of production, we find that we will actually price at average total cost. You can see here that the price intersects the average total cost curve, and when we price at average total costs, there will not be any economic profit. Now, there will be positive accounting profit perhaps, but there will not be positive economic profit, which is really our supernormal profit, our profits above and beyond what is normally received by the firm in perfect competition, but that you might actually see in a monopoly. So while the monopolistically competitive firm can earn economic profits just as the perfectly competitive firm in the short run, just like the perfectly competitive firm, it cannot earn economic profits in the long run and will price at its average total costs. So I urge you to carefully review this video. Let me know if you still have any questions on this material, and let your fellow students know so they might be able to help you out, because this is a model you definitely will be seeing on the exam, and a very important one. In fact, I think it describes probably most relevantly the firms that we as consumers interact with on a daily basis. We generally aren't interacting with true monopolies, nor are we interacting with perfectly competitive firms. But most of the goods and services that we buy on a day-to-day basis, whether it's cereal or laundry detergent or clothing, operates much like a monopolistically competitive market. So again, if you have questions, post them to the discussion forum. Let me know how you can relate this material to your own life, and I wish you all a wonderful week. Take care.